Hey guys, today we're taking a look into something a little more shadowy, the dark web. A place hidden beneath the internet, a space where anonymity reigns, black markets flourish, and whispers of secret forums and digital ghosts still echo. It's where Silk Road once ran a global drug empire, where hackers trade in zero-day exploits, and where even governments quietly linger. Now please, get yourself comfortable, maybe dim the lights just a little, as we're about to step into the unseen side of the internet. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe when you wake up. Let's begin our journey. The story begins not with criminal masterminds or digital anarchists, but with mathematicians and government researchers working in the fluorescent-lit laboratories of the United States Naval Research Laboratory. The year was 1995, and the Cold War's echoes still reverberated through the corridors of American intelligence agencies. Paul Siverson, Michael Reed, and David Goldschlag had no idea that their work on protecting government communications would eventually birth one of the most notorious corners of the internet. These three researchers faced a peculiar problem. How could government agents, diplomats, and military personnel communicate online without revealing their identities or locations? The internet was already becoming a surveillance nightmare, with every click, every message, and every download potentially monitored by hostile foreign powers. Traditional encryption could protect the content of messages, but it couldn't hide who was talking to whom or where they were located. The metadata, the digital fingerprints left behind by every online interaction, remained glaringly visible to anyone watching the network traffic. Their solution was elegant in its complexity: onion routing. Like the layers of an onion, each message would be wrapped in multiple layers of encryption, passed through a series of relay computers around the world, with each relay only knowing the previous and next step in the chain. No single computer in the network would know both the source and destination of any communication. It was a system designed to make surveillance nearly impossible, even for the most sophisticated intelligence agencies. The project, initially called the Onion Router, would eventually become known by its acronym, TOR. But in those early days of the mid-1990s, it existed only as theoretical mathematics and experimental code. The researchers published their papers, refined their algorithms, and slowly built the foundation for what would become the world's most powerful anonymity network. By 2000, the technology had evolved from theoretical concept to working prototype. The US Navy had successfully demonstrated that onion routing could protect their communications, but they faced an unexpected problem. A network used only by government agents would be virtually useless for anonymity. If only spies used the system, then anyone using it would immediately be identified as a potential spy. The network needed civilian user slots of them to provide cover for legitimate government operations. This realization led to one of the most ironic decisions in internet history. To protect their own anonymity, the US government would need to release their secret communication tool to the public. In 2002, the Naval Research Laboratory released the Tor software as open source code, making it freely available to anyone in the world. The very tool designed to protect American intelligence operations was now in the hands of dissidents, journalists, activists, and eventually criminals. The early Tor network was a fragile ecosystem. With only a few hundred users and dozens of relay servers, it was slow, unreliable, and difficult to use. Most early adopters were technically sophisticated users, computer scientists, privacy advocates, and researchers who understood both the potential and the risks of the technology. The network existed primarily on the regular internet, with users accessing normal websites through Tor's anonymizing proxies. But as the network grew, a parallel digital universe began to emerge. Enterprising users realized that Tor could host websites as well as access them, creating what would become known as hidden services or onion sites. These websites existed only within the Tor network, accessible only to users running Tor software and identified by cryptographic addresses ending in .onion rather than traditional domain names. The first hidden services were innocent enough: personal blogs, forums for discussing privacy and anonymity, and experimental websites created by curious programmers. The addresses were random strings of letters and numbers, ugly, unmemorable, and constantly changing. But they represented something revolutionary. Websites that existed outside the traditional internet infrastructure, beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement and government surveillance. As the 2000s progressed, the Tor network attracted a diverse community of users. Journalists in authoritarian countries used it to communicate with sources and publish sensitive stories. Dissidents in China, Iran, and other repressive regimes used it to access blocked websites and coordinate resistance activities. Ordinary citizens concerned about privacy began using it to protect their browsing habits from increasingly invasive corporate surveillance. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights organization, became an early champion of Tor technology. They provided funding and advocacy, helping to transform the project from a government research initiative into a broader movement for digital privacy and freedom. The Tor project, established as a non-profit organization in 2006, began actively promoting the technology as a tool for human rights and democratic participation. Roger Dingledine, one of the key developers of Tor, spent these years traveling the world, teaching activists and journalists how to use the technology safely. He spoke at conferences, wrote tutorials, and helped establish Tor communities in countries where internet freedom was under threat. The network grew steadily, reaching thousands of users and hundreds of relay servers by the middle of the decade. But growth brought new challenges and new users with different motivations. As Tor became more popular and easier to use, it began attracting people who wanted anonymity for reasons having nothing to do with political freedom or privacy rights. The same technology that protected dissidents and journalists also protected criminals, hackers, and other individuals engaged in illegal activities. The first criminal enterprises on Tor were relatively modest affairs: small-scale drug dealers, sellers of stolen credit card information, and individuals offering various illegal services. These early markets were crude, often unreliable, and frequently shut down by their own operators or law enforcement. But they demonstrated the potential for anonymous commerce on the dark web, setting the stage for much larger and more sophisticated criminal operations. By 2008, the Tor network had become a substantial part of the Internet's hidden infrastructure. With tens of thousands of daily users and hundreds of thousands of installations worldwide, it was no longer a niche tool for privacy enthusiasts and government agents. It had become a platform for a parallel digital economy, complete with its own culture, customs, and unwritten rules. The network's growth coincided with the global financial crisis, which created both desperation and opportunity in the digital underground. As traditional economic systems struggled, alternative economies flourished in the shadows of the Internet. Tor provided the infrastructure for these alternative markets, enabling transactions that would have been impossible or extremely risky on the regular Internet. The anonymity provided by Tor wasn't perfect. Sophisticated adversaries could still potentially trace users through various techniques, but it was good enough for most purposes. For the first time in human history, individuals could communicate, trade, and organize completely anonymously on a global scale. The implications of this technology were still being understood, but it was clear that the Internet would never be the same. As the first decade of the 21st century drew to a close, Tor had evolved from a government research project into a global phenomenon. The network that had been created to protect American intelligence operations now served users in every country on Earth, facilitating everything from democratic organizing to criminal enterprise. The stage was set for the next phase of the dark web's evolution, when anonymous communication would be combined with digital currency to create markets of unprecedented scale and sophistication. The missing piece of the puzzle arrived on January 3, 2009, hidden in 58 lines of cryptographic code that would fundamentally alter the balance of power between individuals and institutions. Satoshi Nakamoto, a pseudonymous figure whose true identity remains one of the Internet's greatest mysteries, released the first Bitcoin software and mined the Genesis block that would launch a financial revolution. Embedded in that first block was a message that revealed the creator's motivations. The Times 3, Jan. 2009 Chancellor, on brink of second bailout for banks. Bitcoin represented something that had never existed before. Truly digital money that could be transferred between strangers without any intermediary, bank, or government authority. Unlike previous attempts at digital currency, Bitcoin solved the fundamental problem of double spending through an ingenious system called blockchain, a distributed ledger, maintained by thousands of computers around the world, each validating and recording every transaction in permanent cryptographic history. For the early Tor community, Bitcoin's arrival was nothing short of miraculous. The dark web had communication infrastructure through onion routing, but commerce remained problematic. Traditional payment methods, credit cards, bank transfers, PayPal, all required revealing real-world identities and could be easily traced by law enforcement. Cash transactions were impossible in a digital environment, but Bitcoin offered something unprecedented: the ability to transfer value anonymously between parties who had never met and might never meet. The early Bitcoin community consisted largely of cryptographers, computer scientists, and libertarian-minded individuals who believed in the potential of decentralized systems. Many of these early adopters were also interested in privacy technologies like Tor, creating a natural overlap between the two communities. Bitcoin forums buzzed with discussions about using the cryptocurrency to facilitate anonymous transactions, though most participants were still thinking in terms of legitimate commerce rather than illegal markets. The first documented Bitcoin transaction for physical goods occurred in May 2010, when programmer Laszlo Hanyecz paid 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 Papa John's pizzas. At the time, those Bitcoins were worth approximately $40. The transaction required finding someone willing to accept this strange new digital currency in exchange for real-world goods, a process that took several days of negotiation on Bitcoin forums. It was a historic moment, proving that Bitcoin could indeed function as money, but it also highlighted the challenges of using cryptocurrency for everyday transactions. As Bitcoin gained recognition and value throughout 2010 and 2011, creative individuals began exploring its potential for facilitating markets that couldn't exist in the traditional financial system. The combination of Tor's anonymity and Bitcoin's pseudonymous transactions created unprecedented opportunities for commerce outside the reach of traditional law enforcement and regulatory systems. The first attempts at dark web marketplaces were crude affairs. Sites like the Farmer's Market emerged in late 2009, selling primarily marijuana and other drugs through encrypted email systems and anonymous payment methods. These early markets were small, unreliable, and frequently shut down by their operators who feared law enforcement. They required users to navigate complex technical procedures and often resulted in scams rather than successful transactions. But these primitive markets proved the concept and attracted increasingly sophisticated operators. By 2010, several competing marketplaces had emerged on Tor, each trying to solve the fundamental problems of anonymous commerce: how to establish trust between strangers, how to handle disputes, and how to protect both buyers and sellers from law enforcement and criminals. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: a young physics student and entrepreneur named Ross Ulbricht, who had become fascinated with libertarian economics and the potential of free markets unconstrained by government regulation. Ulbricht had been experimenting with various online businesses throughout his college years, selling everything from used books to day trading services. But he dreamed of creating something larger, a truly free market, where individuals could buy and sell anything without interference from authorities. In early 2011, Ulbricht began developing what would become the most infamous marketplace in internet history. Working alone from his apartment in Austin, Texas, he combined his understanding of economics, his technical skills, and his libertarian philosophy to create a platform that would revolutionize underground commerce. He called it Silk Road, named after the ancient trade routes that connected East and West, facilitating commerce across cultural and political boundaries. Silk Road launched quietly in February 2011, with Ulbricht operating under the pseudonym dread pirate Roberts, a reference to the mysterious character from The Princess Bride, whose identity was passed from person to person. The site's design was remarkably sophisticated for its time, resembling legitimate e-commerce platforms like Amazon or eBay, rather than the crude forums and email systems used by earlier dark web markets. The innovation that set Silk Road apart was its escrow system. Rather than requiring buyers to trust sellers completely, the site held Bitcoin payments until buyers confirmed they had received their goods. This simple mechanism solved one of the fundamental problems of anonymous commerce: how to prevent fraud when neither party could be held accountable through traditional legal systems. For the first time, strangers could conduct illegal transactions with reasonable confidence that they wouldn't be cheated. Ulbricht also implemented a reputation system, similar to those used by legitimate online marketplaces. Buyers could rate sellers based on product quality, shipping speed, and customer service. Sellers could build long-term businesses by maintaining high ratings and satisfied customers. This created incentives for professionalism and quality that had never existed in illegal markets, which traditionally relied on violence and intimidation to maintain order. The early months of Silk Road were slow but steady. The site attracted a few dozen vendors selling primarily marijuana, psychedelic drugs, and other substances popular among the tech-savvy early adopters who made up most of the Tor user base. Transactions were measured in hundreds of dollars rather than thousands, and the entire marketplace generated perhaps a few $1,000s in monthly volume. But word spread quickly through online drug forums, libertarian communities, and privacy-focused websites. Silk Road offered something that had never existed before: a safe, convenient way to purchase illegal drugs without dealing with dangerous street dealers or risking arrest in face-to-face transactions. Buyers could browse products from the safety of their homes, read reviews from other customers, and receive their purchases through the mail with minimal risk of detection. The site's growth was exponential. By late 2011, Silk Road hosted hundreds of vendors and thousands of active users. Monthly transaction volume reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, with Bitcoin payments flowing through the site's escrow system in increasing quantities. The marketplace had become a significant part of the Bitcoin economy, creating constant demand for the cryptocurrency and helping to establish its legitimacy as a medium of exchange. Ulbricht found himself managing not just a website, but an entire underground economy. He implemented increasingly sophisticated policies and procedures, mediating disputes between buyers and sellers, enforcing quality standards, and maintaining the technical infrastructure required to support thousands of simultaneous users. He hired administrators and moderators, paying them in Bitcoin to help manage the site's operations. The success of Silk Road attracted imitators and competitors. Other marketplaces began appearing on Tor, each trying to capture a portion of the growing market for anonymous commerce. Some focused on specific types of goods, drugs, stolen data, counterfeit documents, while others attempted to replicate Silk Road's general marketplace model. Competition drove innovation, with sites adding new features like multi-signature Bitcoin transactions, improved security measures, and more sophisticated vendor management systems. By 2012, the dark web marketplace ecosystem had become a significant economic force. Thousands of vendors were earning their primary income through anonymous sales, and tens of thousands of buyers were regularly purchasing goods through Tor-based markets. The total economy was still relatively small compared to legitimate e-commerce, but it was growing rapidly and attracting increasing attention from law enforcement agencies around the world. The combination of Tor and Bitcoin had created something unprecedented in human history: a global, anonymous marketplace where individuals could buy and sell virtually anything without government oversight or interference. The implications were profound, challenging fundamental assumptions about law enforcement, regulation, and social control in the digital age. The transformation of Silk Road from experimental marketplace to criminal empire unfolded with breathtaking speed throughout 2012 and 2013. What had begun as Ross Ulbricht's libertarian experiment in free market economics had evolved into a sophisticated operation generating millions of dollars in revenue and facilitating the distribution of tons of illegal drugs worldwide. The site's success had profound implications that extended far beyond the dark web, forcing governments, law enforcement agencies, and financial institutions to confront the reality of truly anonymous digital commerce. By mid-2012, Silk Road hosted over 1,000 active vendors, selling everything from marijuana and cocaine to prescription medications and exotic psychedelics. The site's professional appearance and user-friendly interface had attracted buyers who would never have considered purchasing drugs through traditional illegal channels. College students could order MDMA for weekend parties, chronic pain patients could purchase prescription opioids without visiting doctors, and psychedelic enthusiasts could access rare compounds that were impossible to find on the street. The marketplace operated with a level of customer service that would have impressed legitimate businesses. Vendors competed not just on price, but on product quality, shipping speed, and customer satisfaction. Many sellers provided detailed product descriptions, laboratory test results, and professional packaging that rivaled legitimate pharmaceutical companies. Buyers could read hundreds of reviews before making purchases, creating an unprecedented level of transparency in illegal drug markets. Ulbricht, still operating under the Dread Pirate Roberts persona, had become the philosopher king of this digital drug empire. He regularly posted on the site's forums, engaging in lengthy discussions about economics, politics, and philosophy with users from around the world. His writings revealed a brilliant but increasingly grandiose individual who saw himself as leading a revolution against government tyranny and economic oppression. He spoke of Silk Road not merely as a marketplace, but as a demonstration of how society could function without coercive government intervention. The site's economic model was elegantly simple yet highly lucrative. Silk Road collected a commission on every transaction, typically between 5 and 10% of the total sale price. With monthly transaction volumes reaching tens of millions of dollars by late 2012, these commissions generated enormous revenue. Bitcoin's appreciation in value multiplied these profits. Coins collected as fees when Bitcoin traded for $10 were worth hundreds of dollars by the following year. But success brought unwanted attention. By 2012, Silk Road had become impossible to ignore for law enforcement agencies worldwide. The Drug Enforcement Administration, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Revenue Service, and dozens of international law enforcement organizations had begun dedicating significant resources to understanding and dismantling the site. The challenge they faced was unprecedented. How do you investigate and prosecute criminals who operate in complete anonymity? Traditional drug enforcement relied on informants, surveillance, and following money trails through the banking system. But Silk Road users were anonymous, communications were encrypted, and payments flowed through the Bitcoin blockchain rather than traditional financial institutions. Law enforcement agencies found themselves confronting a criminal organization that operated like a conventional business, but remained almost completely invisible to traditional investigative techniques. The first breakthrough came through old-fashioned detective work rather than sophisticated technology. In July 2012, a package containing drugs from Silk Road was intercepted by customs agents, leading to the arrest of a buyer in Australia. Under questioning, the buyer revealed details about how Silk Road operated, providing law enforcement with their first concrete intelligence about the site's structure and procedures. Similar arrests began occurring around the world as packages were intercepted and buyers were identified. Each arrest provided additional intelligence, allowing investigators to build a more complete picture of Silk Road's operations. They learned about the site's commission structure, its dispute resolution procedures, and the identities of major vendors. But the masterminds behind the operation remained frustratingly anonymous. The breakthrough that would eventually lead to Silk Road's downfall began with a seemingly minor mistake. In January 2011, someone using the name Altoid had posted on several drug forums advertising a new anonymous marketplace called Silk Road. Months later, the same username appeared on a Bitcoin forum asking technical questions about Tor hidden services. The email address associated with these posts was rosselbricht@gmail.com. This connection, discovered by IRS investigator Gary Alford in 2013, provided the first real-world link to Silk Road's operations. Ross Ulbricht suddenly became a person of interest in what had been an entirely anonymous investigation. Agents began surveillance of Ulbricht's activities, monitoring his internet usage and physical movements while building a case against him. Meanwhile, Silk Road continued to grow and evolve. The site expanded beyond drugs to include other illegal goods and services, stolen credit card information, counterfeit documents, hacking tools, and even weapons. Competing marketplaces emerged, each trying to capture a portion of the growing market for anonymous commerce. Sites like Atlantis, Black Market Reloaded, and DeepBay offered similar services, creating a diverse ecosystem of dark web markets. The proliferation of marketplaces created new challenges for both law enforcement and users. Each site had different security procedures, different vendors, and different reputations for reliability. Users had to navigate between multiple platforms, maintaining separate accounts and Bitcoin wallets for each marketplace. The dark web was becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, making it both more resilient to law enforcement action and more difficult for casual users to navigate. Ulbricht's management of Silk Road during this period revealed both his entrepreneurial genius and his growing paranoia. He implemented increasingly sophisticated security measures, requiring all site communications to be encrypted and establishing elaborate procedures for verifying vendor identities. He hired additional administrators and moderators, paying them substantial salaries in Bitcoin to help manage the site's operations. But success was changing Ulbricht in disturbing ways. The vast sums of money flowing through Silk Road had accumulated hundreds of thousands of bitcoins worth tens of millions of dollars, combined with the constant threat of law enforcement attention, created enormous psychological pressure. Communications intercepted by law enforcement revealed someone becoming increasingly isolated, paranoid, and willing to use violence to protect his operation. The most shocking revelation came through the investigation of Curtis Green, a Silk Road administrator who had been arrested by law enforcement and was cooperating with investigators. Ulbricht, believing that Green had stolen money from the site and was cooperating with authorities, allegedly arranged for Green's murder through another Silk Road user. Unknown to Ulbricht, the supposed hitman was actually an undercover law enforcement agent, and Green's murder was faked to maintain the investigation's cover. This incident, along with several similar alleged murder-for-hire schemes, revealed how far Ulbricht had traveled from his original libertarian idealism. The peaceful philosopher who had dreamed of creating a voluntary society had become someone willing to order the deaths of people who threatened his criminal empire. The transformation illustrated the corrupting influence of absolute power and vast wealth, even in someone who had begun with seemingly noble intentions. By mid-2013, Silk Road was generating over $100 million in annual revenue and had facilitated the sale of thousands of kilograms of illegal drugs. The site hosted nearly 14,000 listings from over 4,000 vendors, serving customers in virtually every country on Earth. It had become the largest drug marketplace in human history, dwarfing traditional criminal organizations in both scope and sophistication. The site's success had also transformed the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem. Silk Road was one of Bitcoin's largest commercial applications, creating constant demand for the currency and helping to establish its legitimacy as a medium of exchange. The site's operations had made Bitcoin essential infrastructure for the dark web economy, while Bitcoin's appreciation in value had made Silk Road's operators extraordinarily wealthy. But the investigation was closing in. Law enforcement agencies had identified dozens of major vendors and administrators, intercepted thousands of packages, and built detailed profiles of the site's operations. The amateur operational security that had characterized Silk Road's early days was proving inadequate against the resources of multiple international law enforcement agencies working in coordination. The end when it came, would be swift and devastating, marking not just the fall of a criminal empire, but the beginning of a new phase in the ongoing battle between anonymous technologies and government authority. The final act of the Silk Road saga unfolded on a crisp October afternoon in 2013 in the most mundane of settings, the science fiction section of the Glen Park Library in San Francisco. Ross Ulbricht, 29 years old and worth tens of millions of dollars in Bitcoin, sat at a public computer terminal, logged into his laptop, managing the world's largest drug marketplace, while surrounded by curious teenagers and elderly patrons browsing mystery novels. He had no idea that FBI agents were watching his every keystroke, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The operation to arrest Ulbricht, codenamed Marco Polo, had been months in the planning. Law enforcement agencies across multiple countries had coordinated their efforts, preparing to simultaneously shut down Silk Road servers while arresting its administrator. The challenge was enormous. They needed to catch Ulbricht while he was actively logged into the site as Dread Pirate Roberts, preventing him from destroying evidence or transferring the massive Bitcoin fortune under his control. Agent Christopher Tarbell of the FBI had spent weeks studying Ulbricht's habits, learning his routines, and identifying the optimal location for arrest. The library presented the perfect opportunity, a public space where Ulbricht felt safe, with multiple exit routes that could be quietly blocked by agents. The plan required split-second timing. Agents would stage a fake argument to distract Ulbricht, then move in before he could close his laptop or log out of his accounts. At exactly 3:15 p.m. on October 1st, two agents began a loud altercation near Ulbricht's table, drawing his attention away from his screen. In the seconds while he looked up, another agent slipped behind him and grabbed his laptop, keeping it open and preventing him from logging out. "You're under arrest," the agent said quietly, as Ulbricht's face registered shock and disbelief. The Dread Pirate Roberts, the mysterious figure who had built a drug empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was just a young man in a public library, caught completely off guard by old-fashioned police work. The evidence recovered from Ulbricht's laptop was devastating. Agents found chat logs detailing every aspect of Silk Road's operations, financial records showing the site's enormous profits, and a personal journal in which Ulbricht had documented his transformation from idealistic entrepreneur to criminal mastermind. The journal entries revealed his growing paranoia, his struggles with the moral implications of his actions, and his ultimate decision to use violence to protect his empire. Most damaging were the communications regarding the alleged murder-for-hire schemes. Agents recovered messages in which Ulbricht had discussed arranging the deaths of several individuals who he believed posed threats to Silk Road's operations. While these murders had never actually occurred, they were elaborate stings conducted by law enforcement. The communications revealed Ulbricht's willingness to kill to protect his criminal organization. The Bitcoin wallet recovered from Ulbricht's laptop contained over 144,000 Bitcoins, worth approximately $28 million at the time of his arrest. This represented just a portion of his total wealth. Additional wallets contained hundreds of thousands more Bitcoins accumulated over Silk Road's 2.5-year operation. The seizure represented one of the largest forfeitures in law enforcement history and provided dramatic evidence of the site's profitability. Within hours of Ulbricht's arrest, Silk Road vanished from the dark web. The site's servers, located in various countries around the world, were simultaneously seized by law enforcement agencies working in coordination. Users attempting to access the marketplace found only a seizure notice from the FBI announcing the end of what they called the most sophisticated and extensive criminal marketplace on the internet. The shutdown sent shockwaves through the dark web community. Tens of thousands of users who had come to depend on Silk Road for purchasing drugs suddenly found themselves without access to their preferred marketplace. Vendors who had built substantial businesses on the platform lost their primary source of income overnight. The broader Bitcoin community watched nervously as the cryptocurrency's price plummeted in response to the news, falling from over $100 to less than $90 within hours. But the most profound impact was psychological. Silk Road had seemed invincible to its users, protected by the anonymity of Tor and the pseudonymity of Bitcoin. The site's sophisticated security measures and Ulbricht's careful operational procedures had created an aura of invulnerability that attracted users who believed they were safe from law enforcement detection. The sudden, dramatic shutdown shattered these illusions, forcing users to confront the reality that no system was perfectly secure. The arrest and shutdown also revealed the extent of law enforcement's capabilities in investigating dark web crimes. The techniques used to identify and arrest Ulbricht demonstrated that traditional investigative method surveillance, financial analysis, and human intelligence remained effective even in the anonymous digital realm. The investigation had succeeded not through sophisticated technological attacks, but through patient, methodical police work combined with operational security failures by the site's operators. Media coverage of Ulbricht's arrest was extensive and largely sensational. News outlets portrayed him alternately as a criminal mastermind and a naive young man who had gotten in over his head. The story had all the elements of a compelling narrative: a brilliant young entrepreneur, a revolutionary technology, vast sums of money, and an inevitable fall from grace. The coverage brought widespread public attention to both the dark web and Bitcoin, introducing millions of people to technologies they had never heard of before. The legal proceedings that followed would prove almost as dramatic as the arrest itself. Ulbricht's defense team argued that he had created Silk Road, but had sold it to others early in its operation, remaining involved only as a fall guy to protect the site's real operators. They portrayed him as a scapegoat, a young idealist who had been manipulated by more sophisticated criminals into taking responsibility for crimes he didn't commit. Prosecutors presented a different narrative, painting Ulbricht as the calculating leader of a massive criminal organization who had corrupted thousands of people and enriched himself through drug trafficking. They argued that his alleged willingness to order murders demonstrated the dangerous escalation that had resulted from his criminal activities. The evidence recovered from his laptop, they contended, proved conclusively that he was Dread Pirate Roberts and had controlled Silk Road throughout its operation. The trial, which began in January 2015, captivated public attention and raised fundamental questions about technology, freedom, and criminal justice in the digital age. Supporters of Ulbricht argued that he was being persecuted for creating a platform that others had used for illegal activities, comparing him to the creators of legitimate technologies that had been misused by criminals. They portrayed him as a political prisoner, prosecuted for his libertarian beliefs rather than any specific criminal acts. Critics countered that Ulbricht had knowingly profited from drug trafficking and had demonstrated his willingness to use violence to protect his criminal enterprise. They argued that his libertarian philosophy was merely a convenient justification for criminal behavior and that his prosecution was necessary to deter others from following his example. The jury's verdict, delivered on February 4, 2015, was swift and decisive. Ulbricht was found guilty on all 7 counts, including continuing criminal enterprise, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and computer hacking. The conviction carried a potential sentence of life in prison, reflecting the severity of the charges and the scale of his criminal operation. But even as Ulbricht awaited sentencing, the dark web ecosystem was already adapting to Silk Road's absence. Within weeks of the site's shutdown, competing marketplaces had expanded their operations to serve the displaced users. New sites emerged, claiming to have learned from Silk Road's security failures and promising better protection for both vendors and buyers. The most significant successor was Silk Road 2.0, launched just 6 weeks after the original site's closure by a group claiming to be former Silk Road administrators. The new site promised to continue Dread Pirate Roberts' mission, offering many of the same vendors and maintaining similar policies and procedures. Other competitors included Agora, Evolution, and Alphabet, each attempting to capture a portion of the market left vacant by Silk Road's closure. The rapid emergence of these successor sites demonstrated both the resilience of the dark web economy and the limitations of law enforcement's victory. While shutting down Silk Road had been a significant achievement, it had not eliminated the underlying demand for anonymous drug markets or the technological infrastructure that made them possible. The hydra-headed nature of the dark web meant that cutting off one marketplace only encouraged the growth of others. The Bitcoin seized from Ulbricht's wallets presented law enforcement with an unprecedented challenge: how to handle a massive fortune in cryptocurrency that existed only as digital entries on a blockchain. The coins had to be stored securely to prevent theft while maintaining their value for eventual forfeiture proceedings. The FBI's handling of these bitcoins would itself become a source of controversy, as the agency's unfamiliarity with cryptocurrency security led to several embarrassing incidents. As Ulbricht faced the prospect of life in prison and the dark web community adapted to a post-Silk Road reality, the broader implications of the case continued to reverberate through discussions of technology, privacy, and criminal justice. The rise and fall of Silk Road had demonstrated both the revolutionary potential and the dangerous risks of truly anonymous digital technologies. The period following Silk Road's collapse marked the beginning of what historians would later call the golden age of dark web marketplaces, a time when dozens of competing sites flourished and the underground economy reached unprecedented levels of sophistication and scale. Far from destroying the dark web drug trade, law enforcement's victory had inadvertently accelerated its evolution, forcing marketplace operators to develop better security measures, more resilient infrastructure, and more sophisticated business models. Silk Road 2.0 emerged as the most prominent successor. Launched in November 2013 by a mysterious figure calling himself DEFCON, the new site claimed to carry on the legacy of the original Dread Pirate Roberts, adopting similar policies and even using modified versions of Silk Road's original code. DEFCON presented himself as a reformer, promising to learn from Ross Ulbricht's mistakes and create a more secure marketplace that could resist law enforcement infiltration. The new site implemented several security improvements based on lessons learned from the original Silk Road's downfall. All communications were encrypted using stronger cryptographic protocols, vendor verification procedures were more rigorous, and the site's infrastructure was distributed across multiple countries to make seizure more difficult. Most significantly, Silk Road 2.0 introduced multi-signature Bitcoin transactions, requiring multiple parties to approve each payment and making it more difficult for any single person to steal the site's funds. But DEFCON's promises of improved security proved hollow. Less than a year after launch, in November 2014, law enforcement agencies shut down Silk Road 2.0 and arrested its administrator, Blake Benthall, in San Francisco. The investigation revealed that many of the site's supposed security improvements were cosmetic, and that law enforcement had successfully infiltrated the marketplace from its earliest days. The rapid shutdown of Silk Road 2.0 sent another shockwave through the dark web community, but this time the response was more measured and strategic. Rather than rushing to recreate Silk Road's centralized model, entrepreneurs began experimenting with more distributed approaches that would be harder for law enforcement to attack. The marketplace ecosystem became more diverse, with different sites specializing in different types of goods and services. Evolution Marketplace emerged as one of the most successful post-Silk Road platforms, growing to become the largest dark web marketplace by mid-2014. Unlike previous sites that had tried to recreate Silk Road's exact model, Evolution focused on user experience and reliability. The site featured a clean, modern interface that made it accessible to less technically sophisticated users and implemented robust customer service procedures that helped resolve disputes quickly and fairly. Evolution's success attracted thousands of vendors and hundreds of thousands of users, generating millions of dollars in monthly transaction volume. The site's administrators, operating under the pseudonyms Verto and Kimball, positioned themselves as professional business people rather than ideological revolutionaries. They focused on generating profits rather than making political statements, treating their marketplace as a business rather than a movement. Alphabay, launched in December 2014, by a Canadian programmer using the alias Alfatwo, took a different approach, emphasizing security and anonymity above all else. The site implemented some of the most sophisticated security measures ever seen on a dark web marketplace, including advanced encryption, multi-factor authentication, and elaborate procedures for verifying vendor identities. Alfatwo presented himself as a perfectionist, constantly updating the site's security measures and boasting about its resistance to law enforcement infiltration. The proliferation of competing marketplaces created a dynamic ecosystem where innovation flourished. Sites competed not just on the range of goods they offered, but on security features, user experience, customer service, and reliability. This competition drove rapid improvements in dark web technology, with each new marketplace incorporating lessons learned from its predecessors' successes and failures. The diversity of marketplaces also reflected the diversification of the dark web economy. While drugs remained the most popular category of goods, sites began specializing in other illegal products and services. Some focused on stolen data credit card numbers, identity documents, login credentials, while others specialized in counterfeit goods, weapons, or hacking services. The dark web was becoming a comprehensive alternative economy, serving virtually every type of illegal demand. During this period, law enforcement agencies around the world were also evolving their approaches to dark web investigations. The success in shutting down Silk Road had provided valuable lessons about how to investigate anonymous marketplaces, but it had also revealed the limitations of traditional law enforcement methods. Agencies began developing new techniques specifically designed for the digital underground. One of the most significant developments was the creation of specialized dark web units within major law enforcement agencies. The FBI established a dedicated team focused exclusively on investigating Tor-based marketplaces, while European agencies created similar specialized units. These teams combined traditional investigative techniques with cutting-edge technology, employing computer forensics experts, cryptocurrency analysts, and undercover agents trained in digital tradecraft. The DEA's Operation Anonymous, launched in 2014, demonstrated the new sophistication of law enforcement's approach. The operation coordinated agencies from 17 countries in simultaneous raids that shut down dozens of dark web marketplaces and arrested their operators. The operation's success relied on months of undercover work, detailed financial analysis of Bitcoin transactions, and international cooperation on an unprecedented scale. But the most significant breakthrough came through the development of advanced traffic analysis techniques that could potentially compromise Tor's anonymity. While the details remained classified, law enforcement agencies began hinting that they had developed methods for correlating traffic entering and leaving the Tor network, potentially allowing them to identify users even when using proper anonymity tools. These developments created an arms race between law enforcement and dark web operators. Each law enforcement success prompted marketplace operators to develop better security measures, while each new security innovation challenged investigators to develop more sophisticated attack techniques. The cycle of attack and defense drove rapid innovation on both sides, accelerating the development of both anonymity and surveillance technologies. The period also saw the emergence of more sophisticated criminal organizations operating multiple marketplaces. Rather than putting all their resources into a single site that could be shut down by law enforcement, some groups began operating networks of smaller, interconnected marketplaces. This distributed approach made their operations more resilient to law enforcement action, while providing backup options if individual sites were compromised. The growing sophistication of the dark web economy attracted attention from organized crime groups that had previously focused on traditional illegal activities. Russian cybercriminal organizations, in particular, began establishing significant presences on dark web marketplaces, bringing professional management techniques and substantial financial resources to the underground economy. These traditional criminal organizations introduced new levels of violence and intimidation to the dark web. While early marketplaces had generally operated according to libertarian principles of voluntary exchange, the involvement of violent criminal groups brought threats, extortion, and actual violence to the digital underground. The idealistic vision of peaceful anarchist commerce that had motivated Ross Ulbricht was being replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. The cryptocurrency ecosystem was also evolving in response to law enforcement pressure. While Bitcoin remained the primary currency for dark web transactions, its blockchain's transparency made it increasingly risky for illegal activities. Every Bitcoin transaction was permanently recorded in a public ledger that could be analyzed by law enforcement agencies with sophisticated blockchain analysis tools. In response to these limitations, new privacy-focused cryptocurrencies began gaining popularity on dark web marketplaces. Monero, launched in 2014, used advanced cryptographic techniques to hide transaction amounts, sender and receiver addresses, and other metadata that made Bitcoin transactions traceable. Other privacy coins like Zcash and Dash offered similar features, creating alternatives for users who needed stronger financial privacy. The adoption of privacy cryptocurrencies created new challenges for law enforcement agencies that had developed expertise in tracking Bitcoin transactions. Unlike Bitcoin's transparent blockchain, these new currencies made it extremely difficult or impossible to trace payments, effectively recreating the anonymity that Bitcoin had originally promised but failed to deliver. As 2015 progressed, the dark web marketplace ecosystem had become larger, more diverse, and more sophisticated than it had ever been during Silk Road's heyday. Multiple competing marketplaces served hundreds of thousands of users, facilitating millions of dollars in illegal transactions every month. The infrastructure supporting this economy tore networks, cryptocurrency exchanges, escrow services and vendor networks had become increasingly professionalized and resilient. But this success came with growing risks. The attention attracted by the marketplace ecosystem's growth was bringing increasing law enforcement scrutiny, while the involvement of traditional criminal organizations was introducing new levels of violence and instability. The idealistic phase of the dark web's development was ending, replaced by a more mature but also more dangerous criminal ecosystem. The stage was set for the next phase of the ongoing battle between anonymous technologies and government authority, as both law enforcement agencies and criminal organizations brought increasing resources and sophistication to their conflict. The stakes were rising, and the consequences of victory or defeat were becoming more severe for all participants in this digital underground economy. The illusion of invincibility that had sustained the dark web's golden age shattered spectacularly in March 2015, when Evolution Marketplace, the largest and most successful dark web market since the original Silk Road, simply vanished overnight. Users attempting to access the site found only error messages, while vendors and buyers discovered that their Bitcoin deposits, totaling an estimated $12 million, had disappeared along with the site's administrators. The exit scam, as it became known, sent shockwaves through the dark web community and marked the beginning of a new era of instability and mistrust. Verto and Kimball, Evolution's mysterious administrators, had executed what was perhaps the most successful theft in dark web history. Unlike previous marketplace closures that had resulted from law enforcement action, Evolution's shutdown was entirely voluntary, a calculated decision by its operators to steal their users' funds and disappear. The theft demonstrated a fundamental weakness in the dark web marketplace model. Users had to trust administrators with their money, and that trust could be violated at any moment. The Evolution exit scam had profound psychological effects on the dark web community. Users who had felt increasingly confident about the security and reliability of anonymous marketplaces suddenly confronted the reality that their money could disappear without warning or recourse. The incident highlighted the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the dark web economy. While users sought anonymity to protect themselves from law enforcement, that same anonymity made it impossible to hold marketplace operators accountable for their actions. In the chaos following Evolution's collapse, several smaller marketplaces attempted to capture the displaced users and vendors. Agora Marketplace, which had been operating quietly in evolution's shadow, suddenly found itself inundated with new users seeking a reliable alternative. The site's administrators, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of traffic and concerned about increased law enforcement attention, made the surprising decision to shut down voluntarily in August 2015, claiming they needed to address security concerns. Alphabay, under the leadership of Al Fatwo, emerged as the primary beneficiary of these closures. The site's emphasis on security and its administrators' obsessive attention to operational details had initially limited its growth, but the collapse of larger competitors created an opportunity for rapid expansion. By late 2015, Alphabay had become the largest dark web marketplace, hosting thousands of vendors and facilitating millions of dollars in monthly transactions. Al Fatwo, whose real name was Alexandra Kazes, had built Alphabay from his base in Thailand, where he lived openly as a wealthy entrepreneur, while secretly operating one of the world's largest criminal marketplaces. Unlike previous marketplace administrators who had maintained strict anonymity, Kazes lived lavishly, purchasing expensive cars, luxury properties, and high-end electronics with his profits from the site. His lifestyle represented a new model for dark web entrepreneurship home that prioritized wealth and status over ideological purity or operational security. The growth of Alphabay coincided with the expansion of the dark web economy beyond traditional drug markets. The site hosted an enormous variety of illegal goods and services: stolen credit card data, fake identity documents, counterfeit currency, weapons, hacking tools, and even more disturbing offerings like child exploitation material and hitman services. Alphabay had become a comprehensive criminal marketplace, serving virtually every type of illegal demand. The site's success attracted the attention of Hansa Market, a competing marketplace operated by Dutch administrators who positioned themselves as Alphabay's more security-conscious alternative. Hansa implemented even more sophisticated security measures, including mandatory use of PGP encryption for all communications and advanced techniques for protecting user privacy. The competition between Alphabay and Hansa drove both sites to continuous innovation in security and user experience. But unknown to users of either marketplace, law enforcement agencies had been conducting one of the most sophisticated operations in the history of dark web investigations. Operation Bayonet, coordinated by the FBI, DEA, and European law enforcement agencies, had been underway since 2016, targeting both Alphabay and Hansa through a combination of traditional investigative techniques and cutting-edge digital surveillance methods. The operation began with the identification of Alexandra Kazes through a combination of financial intelligence and traffic analysis. Despite his sophisticated security measures, Kazes had made several operational security mistakes that allowed investigators to link his real-world identity to his Alphabay administrator account. His luxurious lifestyle in Thailand, funded by cryptocurrency profits, had attracted the attention of financial intelligence units that specialized in tracking proceeds from cybercrime. Simultaneously, Dutch police had been conducting their own investigation into Hansa Market, using advanced techniques to compromise the site's security and identify its administrators. The Dutch approach was particularly sophisticated, rather than simply shutting down the marketplace. They had secretly taken control of Hansa's servers and were monitoring all user activity while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. The coordinated takedown began on July 5, 2017, when Thai police, acting on intelligence provided by the FBI, raided Kazes' compound in Bangkok. The raid recovered enormous amounts of evidence, including multiple computers, cryptocurrency wallets containing millions of dollars in Bitcoin and other digital currencies, and detailed records of Alphabay's operations. Kazes was arrested and charged with racketeering, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and other crimes carrying potential sentences of life in prison. The shock of his arrest proved too much for Kazes to bear. On July 12th, just 1 week after his arrest, he was found dead in his Thai jail cell, apparently having committed suicide. His death eliminated the possibility of his cooperation with law enforcement. but investigators had already recovered enough evidence to understand Alphabet's operations in detail. Within hours of Case's arrest, Alphabet disappeared from the dark web, leaving its users scrambling to find alternative marketplaces. Many migrated to Hansa Market, believing it to be a safe haven from law enforcement attention. What they didn't know was that Dutch police had been secretly controlling Hansa for weeks, monitoring every transaction and collecting intelligence on thousands of users. The Dutch operation, known as Operation Bayonet, represented a new approach to dark web law enforcement. Rather than simply shutting down criminal marketplaces, investigators were now taking control of them and using them as intelligence-gathering platforms. For nearly a month, Dutch police operated Hansa Market while collecting detailed information about its users, including their real-world identities, shipping addresses, and criminal activities. The revelation of law enforcement's control over Hansa came as a devastating blow to the dark web community's confidence. Users realized that they had been conducting illegal transactions under the direct observation of police, providing evidence that could be used to prosecute them. The psychological impact was enormous. If law enforcement could secretly control major marketplaces, how could users ever be certain they were safe? The dual takedown of Alphabet and Hansa eliminated the two largest dark web marketplaces simultaneously, removing an estimated 400,000 users and 40,000 vendors from the criminal ecosystem. Law enforcement agencies seized millions of dollars in cryptocurrency and collected intelligence that would fuel investigations for years to come. The operation was hailed as the most successful dark web enforcement action in history. But the response from the dark web community was swift and adaptive. Within days of the takedowns, new marketplaces began appearing to serve the displaced users. Dream Market, which had been operating quietly for several years, suddenly experienced explosive growth as users sought alternatives to the shuttered sites. Other marketplaces like Wall Street Market, Berlusconi Market, and Empire Market also expanded rapidly to capture market share. The new generation of marketplaces incorporated lessons learned from Alphabet and Hansa's failures. Administrators implemented more sophisticated security measures, including mandatory multi-signature transactions that prevented exit scams, improved encryption protocols, and more rigorous operational security procedures. The marketplace ecosystem was becoming more resilient through its exposure to law enforcement pressure. The takedowns also accelerated the adoption of new technologies designed to make dark web marketplaces more resistant to law enforcement action. Decentralized marketplace protocols, which distributed market functions across multiple servers to eliminate single points of failure, began gaining popularity. These systems promised to make it impossible for law enforcement to shut down entire marketplaces by seizing central servers. Cryptocurrency technology was also evolving in response to law enforcement pressure. The blockchain analysis techniques that had helped identify Alexandra Kazis and other marketplace operators were becoming increasingly sophisticated, forcing dark web users to adopt more advanced privacy measures. Monero gained significant popularity as a Bitcoin alternative, while new privacy coins and mixing services proliferated to meet demand for truly anonymous transactions. The period following the Alphabet and Hansa takedowns marked a turning point in the dark web's evolution. The marketplace ecosystem had demonstrated remarkable resilience, but it had also revealed fundamental vulnerabilities that law enforcement agencies were learning to exploit. The arms race between criminals and law enforcement was intensifying, with each side developing increasingly sophisticated capabilities to attack or defend against the other. As 2017 drew to a close, the dark web had entered a new phase of its development, one characterized by greater sophistication on both sides of the law enforcement divide and higher stakes for all participants in the underground digital economy. While drug marketplaces dominated headlines and law enforcement attention, the dark web had quietly evolved into a vast ecosystem supporting virtually every conceivable form of illegal activity. Beyond the well-known pharmaceutical bazaars, a parallel universe of specialized forums, data markets, and service providers had emerged. creating a comprehensive shadow economy that touched nearly every aspect of modern digital life. These specialized communities operated according to their own rules and hierarchies, developing sophisticated business models that often surpassed their legitimate counterparts in innovation and efficiency. The hacking community represented one of the most influential and profitable segments of the dark web economy. Forums like hack forums, originally launched on the surface web but with significant dark web presence, evolved into comprehensive marketplaces for cybercriminal services. These platforms functioned as professional networks where hackers could advertise their skills, collaborate on complex projects, and share intelligence about new vulnerabilities and attack techniques. The sophistication of these hacking forums rivaled that of legitimate technology companies. Members were ranked according to their reputation and expertise, with senior hackers commanding premium prices for their services. The forums featured detailed tutorials on everything from basic phishing techniques to advanced persistent threat development, creating educational resources that could turn novice computer users into capable cybercriminals within months. One of the most lucrative services offered on these forums was malware as a service, where experienced programmers would develop custom malicious software for clients who lacked the technical skills to create their own. These services operated on subscription models similar to legitimate software companies, with tiered pricing based on the sophistication of the malware and the level of customer support provided. Clients could purchase banking trojans, ransomware, cryptocurrency miners, and other malicious tools with the same ease as buying legitimate software. The market for stolen data had become perhaps the most economically significant sector of the dark web economy outside of drug sales. Massive data breaches at major corporations regularly resulted in millions of credit card numbers, social security numbers, email addresses, and other personal information being sold through dark web marketplaces. The scale of these operations was staggering. Single breaches could result in hundreds of millions of records being offered for sale to criminal organizations worldwide. These data markets operated with remarkable efficiency and sophistication. Stolen information was categorized by type, freshness, and geographic origin, with prices reflecting the relative value of different data sets. Fresh credit card information from wealthy countries commanded premium prices, while older data from developing nations was sold in bulk at significant discounts. The markets featured quality guarantees, customer reviews, and professional customer service that would have impressed legitimate businesses. The infrastructure supporting these data markets was equally sophisticated. Automated systems would test stolen credit card numbers to verify their validity, removing expired or cancelled cards from listings. Geographic and demographic information was used to sort data into targeted packages that appealed to specific criminal organizations. Some vendors specialized in particular types of institutions' healthcare records, educational databases, or government systems, developing expertise that allowed them to command higher prices for their specialized knowledge. The emergence of Full's complete identity packages, containing all the information needed to impersonate someone, represented the evolution of identity theft into a comprehensive service industry. These packages typically included social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, phone numbers, email accounts, and sometimes even answers to security questions commonly used by financial institutions. Criminal organizations could purchase these identity packages and use them to open bank accounts, apply for credit cards, or commit various forms of financial fraud. But the dark web's expansion beyond drugs and financial crime had also enabled far more disturbing activities. Child exploitation material, which had previously been distributed through peer-to-peer networks and private websites, found new distribution channels through Tor-based forums and marketplaces. These communities operated with extreme secrecy and sophisticated security measures, making them among the most difficult targets for law enforcement agencies to infiltrate and disrupt. The scale of child exploitation on the dark web was horrifying. Forums dedicated to sharing such material attracted tens of thousands of members, while marketplaces sold access to vast archives of illegal content. The anonymity provided by Tor enabled predators to operate with unprecedented boldness, creating communities that would have been impossible to maintain on the surface web. Law enforcement agencies around the world had made combating these networks a top priority, but the technical challenges of investigating anonymous networks made progress slow and difficult. Human trafficking networks also exploited the dark web's anonymity to coordinate their activities and advertise their victims. While the extent of actual human trafficking conducted through dark web platforms remained disputed, there was clear evidence that traffickers used Tor-based communication systems to coordinate operations and share intelligence about law enforcement activities. The anonymity that protected political dissidents and privacy advocates also shielded some of the world's most heinous criminal enterprises. The question of hitmen for hire services became one of the most sensationalized aspects of dark web coverage, though the reality was more complex than media reports suggested. Numerous sites claimed to offer assassination services, complete with professional-looking websites, pricing menus, and testimonials from satisfied customers. However, investigations revealed that the vast majority of these services were elaborate scams designed to defraud would-be clients rather than actually commit murders. The economics of these fake hitman services were remarkably simple and effective. Scammers would create professional-looking websites offering assassination services at seemingly reasonable prices, typically requiring payment in Bitcoin before any services were rendered. Once payment was received, the scammers would either disappear entirely or provide fabricated evidence of completed hits while demanding additional payments for various complications. The victims of these scams, people who had attempted to hire assassins, were unlikely to report the crimes to law enforcement, making it a virtually risk-free form of fraud. While most hitman services were fraudulent, law enforcement agencies had documented cases where dark web platforms had been used to solicit actual violence. The case of Besa Mafia, a supposed hitman service that turned out to be an elaborate scam, revealed that hundreds of people had attempted to hire assassins through the platform, paying thousands of dollars for services that were never intended to be delivered. The investigation provided disturbing insights into the number of people willing to use anonymous platforms to harm others. The myth of Red Room's live-streamed torture and murder shows allegedly broadcast to paying audience represented perhaps the darkest corner of dark web mythology. Despite extensive investigation by journalists, researchers, and law enforcement agencies, no credible evidence had ever been found for the existence of actual Red Rooms. The technical requirements for streaming high-quality video through Tor networks, combined with the extreme legal risks involved, made such operations highly impractical. The persistence of Red Room myths reflected both the public's fascination with extreme criminal behavior and the dark web's role as a repository for society's darkest fantasies and fears. While Red Rooms remained in the realm of urban legend, their mythological status contributed to the dark web's reputation as a place where any form of depravity was possible, attracting both genuine criminals and curious individuals who wanted to explore the boundaries of legal and ethical behavior. The Hidden Wiki, an index of dark websites that functioned as the closest thing to a directory for Tor-based services, exemplified the chaotic nature of the anonymous internet. The site listed everything from legitimate privacy tools and whistleblowing platforms to drug marketplaces, hacking forums, and sites claiming to offer various illegal services. The Hidden Wiki's pages were constantly changing as sites appeared and disappeared, creating a dynamic landscape that reflected the unstable nature of the dark web ecosystem. Navigating the Hidden Wiki required significant technical knowledge and careful judgment to distinguish between legitimate services, obvious scams, and potentially dangerous criminal operations. The site's administrators attempted to maintain some standards, removing links to child exploitation material and obvious frauds, but the decentralized nature of the platform made consistent moderation nearly impossible. The diversity of services available through the Hidden Wiki demonstrated how the dark web had evolved into a comprehensive alternative internet serving needs that couldn't be met through legitimate channels. While much of this activity was clearly criminal, The platform also hosted legitimate services that provided valuable privacy and security tools for journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens concerned about surveillance. As law enforcement agencies developed more sophisticated techniques for investigating dark web activities, the various criminal communities began adopting more advanced security measures and operational procedures. The arms race between criminals and law enforcement was driving innovation in both privacy technologies and surveillance techniques, creating a dynamic environment where both sides continuously adapted to counter the other's latest developments. The dark web had become far more than a simple drug marketplace. It was a comprehensive criminal ecosystem that paralleled and sometimes surpassed the legitimate internet in its sophistication and scope, serving as both a technological marvel and a profound challenge to traditional concepts of law enforcement and social order. The years following the Alpha Bay and Hansa takedowns witnessed an unprecedented escalation in the technological sophistication of both dark web operations and law enforcement responses. As 2018 dawned, the marketplace ecosystem had evolved into something resembling a legitimate technology sector, complete with professional development teams, sophisticated marketing strategies, and innovative business models that often surpassed their surface web counterparts in creativity and user experience. Dream Market, which had inherited much of Alphabay's user base, became the template for the new generation of dark web marketplaces. The site's administrators, operating under the collective pseudonym Speedstepper, had learned from their predecessors' mistakes and implemented a comprehensive security architecture that addressed many of the vulnerabilities that had led to previous takedowns. The marketplace featured mandatory multi-signature transactions that prevented exit scams, advanced encryption protocols that protected user communications, and sophisticated operational security procedures that made administrator identification extremely difficult. But Dream Market's success also made it a prime target for law enforcement attention. Throughout 2018, the site experienced increasing pressure from various attacks that many users suspected were law enforcement operations designed to gather intelligence or disrupt operations. The marketplace suffered from frequent downtime, apparent denial of service attacks, and suspected server compromises that created an atmosphere of paranoia and uncertainty among its users. The pressure eventually proved too much for Dream Market's administrators, who announced in March 2019 that they would be shutting down the marketplace voluntarily. Unlike the exit scams that had characterized previous marketplace closures, Dream Market's shutdown was conducted professionally, with administrators providing advance notice to users and vendors and facilitating the migration of operations to other platforms. The shutdown represented a new model for marketplace retirement tone that prioritized user safety over short-term profits. As Dream Market prepared for closure, several competing marketplaces positioned themselves to capture the displaced users and vendors. Wall Street Market, operated by German administrators who had built a reputation for technical excellence and operational security, emerged as one of the leading contenders. The site featured a modern, professional interface that rivaled legitimate e-commerce platforms, along with sophisticated security features designed to protect both users and vendors from law enforcement detection. Empire Market, launched by administrators with apparent connections to the former Alpha Bay operation, took a different approach, emphasizing reliability and customer service over cutting-edge security features. The site's operators focused on creating a stable, user-friendly platform that could accommodate the massive influx of users migrating from Dream Market. Empire's growth was explosive, reaching hundreds of thousands of users within months of Dream Market's closure. But the marketplace consolidation also attracted the attention of law enforcement agencies that had been developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for investigating dark web operations. The success of Operation Bayonet had demonstrated the potential for law enforcement to secretly control major marketplaces, and agencies around the world were working to replicate and improve upon those techniques. The German Federal Criminal Police, working in coordination with American and Dutch agencies, had been conducting a complex operation targeting Wall Street Market since late 2018. The investigation combined traditional detective work with advanced technical surveillance, using traffic analysis, financial intelligence, and undercover operations to identify the marketplace's administrators and infrastructure. The operation culminated in May 2019 with the arrest of Wall Street Market's 3 administrators in Germany and the seizure of the site's servers. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing than a simple marketplace takedown. Law enforcement had been secretly operating Wall Street Market for several weeks before the public shutdown, collecting intelligence on thousands of users while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. The revelation that law enforcement had again successfully taken control of a major marketplace sent shockwaves through the dark web community. Users realized that they could no longer trust even apparently secure and well-established marketplaces, as law enforcement agencies were developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for compromising these platforms without detection. The psychological impact of these successive takedowns was profound and lasting. The dark web community, which had once operated with confidence in the anonymity provided by Tor and cryptocurrency, now faced the reality that law enforcement agencies were developing techniques that could potentially compromise any marketplace or user. The atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust that pervaded dark web forums reflected this new reality. In response to these threats, marketplace operators began implementing even more sophisticated security measures. Some platforms adopted decentralized architectures that distributed operations across multiple servers and jurisdictions, making it more difficult for law enforcement to seize all components simultaneously. Others implemented advanced encryption protocols and operational security procedures that borrowed techniques from military and intelligence organizations. The emergence of next-generation marketplaces represented a fundamental shift in dark web architecture. Platforms like Hydra, which became dominant in Russian-speaking markets, implemented innovative features like integrated cryptocurrency mixing services, automated dispute resolution systems, and sophisticated vendor management tools. These marketplaces operated more like technology companies than traditional criminal organizations, with professional development teams, customer service departments, and marketing strategies. Hydra's success was particularly noteworthy because it demonstrated how dark web marketplaces could adapt to specific geographic and cultural contexts. The platform specialized in serving Russian-speaking users and incorporated features that reflected the preferences and needs of that market. Hydra's administrators understood that success required more than just technical sophistication. It required deep understanding of user behavior and cultural preferences. The cryptocurrency ecosystem was also evolving rapidly in response to law enforcement pressure. Bitcoin's transparency had become a significant liability for dark web users, as blockchain analysis companies developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for tracing transactions and identifying users. The emergence of professional blockchain analysis firms like Chainalysis, Elliptic, and CipherTrace had transformed cryptocurrency investigation from an experimental technique into a mature investigative discipline. In response to these developments, privacy-focused cryptocurrencies gained significant adoption in dark web markets. Monero, which used advanced cryptographic techniques to hide transaction details, became the preferred currency for many vendors and buyers who prioritized financial privacy. The currency's adoption was so widespread that some marketplaces began requiring Monero for all transactions, abandoning Bitcoin entirely due to its traceability. Law enforcement agencies responded to the adoption of privacy coins by developing new investigative techniques that focused on the points where cryptocurrencies intersected with traditional financial systems. Investigators began targeting cryptocurrency exchanges, which were required to collect identity information from their customers and could potentially link anonymous cryptocurrency addresses to real-world identities. The development of cryptocurrency mixing services and tumblers created another layer of complexity in the cat-and-mouse game between criminals and law enforcement. These services promised to break the connection between cryptocurrency addresses by pooling funds from multiple users and redistributing them through complex transaction chains. Some mixing services became so sophisticated that they rivaled traditional money laundering operations in their complexity and effectiveness. But law enforcement agencies were also developing countermeasures to these privacy-enhancing technologies. Advanced blockchain analysis techniques could sometimes trace transactions even through mixing services, while international cooperation allowed investigators to target mixing service operators in jurisdictions where they could be prosecuted. The period also saw the emergence of new types of criminal services that took advantage of the dark web's unique capabilities. Cryptocurrency recovery services claimed to help users retrieve lost or stolen digital currency, though many were sophisticated scams that targeted desperate victims. Darknet consulting services offered to help legitimate businesses understand and monitor dark web activities that might affect their operations. The professionalization of dark web crime extended to the development of sophisticated customer service and dispute resolution systems. Major marketplaces employed teams of moderators and administrators who handled customer complaints, mediated disputes between vendors and buyers, and maintained community standards. These systems often provided better customer service than many legitimate businesses, creating user loyalty that helped marketplaces maintain their customer base even under law enforcement pressure. The arms race between criminals and law enforcement was also driving innovation in privacy and surveillance technologies that had implications far beyond the dark web. The techniques developed for investigating anonymous marketplaces were being adapted for broader surveillance applications, while the privacy technologies created to protect dark web users were being adopted by journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens concerned about government and corporate surveillance. As the decade drew to a close, the dark web had evolved into a mature ecosystem that combined criminal enterprise with technological innovation, creating a parallel economy that operated according to its own rules and values, while constantly adapting to survive in an increasingly hostile environment where both law enforcement agencies and competing criminal organizations posed existential threats to any operation that failed to maintain the highest levels of security and operational discipline. The dawn of 2020 brought unprecedented global upheaval that would fundamentally reshape the dark web landscape in ways that neither criminals nor law enforcement agencies could have anticipated. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began as a health crisis, evolved into an economic and social transformation that created new opportunities for dark web entrepreneurs while simultaneously providing law enforcement with powerful new tools for surveillance and investigation. As governments worldwide implemented lockdown measures and social distancing requirements, traditional drug distribution networks faced severe disruption. Street-level dealers found their operations constrained by movement restrictions and increased police presence, while international trafficking routes were disrupted by border closures and reduced commercial transportation. These disruptions created enormous opportunities for dark web marketplaces, which could continue operating normally while their traditional competitors struggled to adapt to the new reality. The pandemic-driven surge in dark web activity was unprecedented. Existing marketplaces experienced explosive growth as both vendors and buyers migrated online, while new platforms emerged to serve the increased demand. Empire Market, which had become the dominant marketplace following Dream Market's closure, found itself processing transaction volumes that dwarfed anything seen during the Silk Road era. The site's infrastructure, designed to handle hundreds of thousands of users, began struggling under the load of millions of daily visitors. But the pandemic also introduced new categories of illegal goods and services that reflected the global health crisis. Fake COVID-19 vaccines, fraudulent health certificates, and counterfeit personal protective equipment became major product categories on dark web marketplaces. Scammers exploited public fear and desperation to sell everything from miracle cures to fake test results, creating a parallel pandemic of fraud and exploitation. The economic disruption caused by the pandemic also drove many people to seek alternative sources of income through dark web activities. Unemployment levels reached historic highs in many countries, creating desperation that criminal organizations were eager to exploit. Dark web forums experienced surges in recruitment activity as established criminals sought to expand their operations and unemployed individuals looked for ways to generate income outside the legitimate economy. Law enforcement agencies initially struggled to adapt to the pandemic's impact on their operations. Traditional investigative techniques that relied on physical surveillance and in-person coordination became much more difficult to implement under lockdown conditions. However, agencies quickly realized that the pandemic had also created unprecedented opportunities for digital surveillance and investigation. The most significant law enforcement operation of the pandemic era was Operation Disruptor, a coordinated international effort that targeted dark web drug trafficking on an unprecedented scale. Launched in September 2020, the operation involved law enforcement agencies from 9 countries working together to arrest vendors and administrators identified through previous marketplace takedowns and ongoing surveillance operations. Operation Disruptor was notable not just for its scale 179 arrests across multiple continents, but for its sophisticated use of intelligence gathered from previous operations. Investigators had spent months analyzing data seized from Wall Street Market, Alphabet, and other shuttered platforms, using advanced analytics to identify patterns and connections that revealed the real-world identities of supposedly anonymous vendors. The operation demonstrated how law enforcement agencies were learning to exploit the interconnected nature of the dark web ecosystem. Vendors who operated on multiple platforms used similar usernames across different sites or maintained consistent operational patterns could be identified through cross-platform analysis. The same anonymity tools that criminals relied on for protection were generating digital fingerprints that sophisticated investigators could use to track them across different platforms and time periods. But Operation Disruptor also revealed the resilience of the dark web economy. Despite the arrests of hundreds of vendors and the seizure of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency, the marketplace ecosystem continued to function. New vendors quickly replaced those who had been arrested, and transaction volumes remained relatively stable. The operation had succeeded in disrupting individual criminal operations, but it had failed to significantly impact the overall market. The pandemic period also witnessed the emergence of new types of criminal services specifically designed to exploit the global health crisis. Vaccination passport services offered to provide fake documentation showing COVID-19 vaccination status, while contact tracing evasion services promised to help users avoid government tracking systems designed to monitor the spread of the virus. These pandemic-specific services reflected the dark web's remarkable ability to adapt to changing circumstances and emerging opportunities. Criminal entrepreneurs demonstrated the same agility and innovation that characterized legitimate startups, rapidly developing new products and services to meet evolving customer demands. The period also saw significant evolution in the cryptocurrency landscape that supported dark web activities. Bitcoin's price appreciation throughout 2020 and 2021 created enormous wealth for early dark web adopters who had accumulated the cryptocurrency during its early years. Some vendors who had been operating since the Silk Road era found themselves sitting on Bitcoin holdings worth millions of dollars. But the mainstream adoption of cryptocurrency also brought increased regulatory scrutiny and compliance requirements that made it more difficult to use digital currencies for illegal activities. Major cryptocurrency exchanges implemented sophisticated know-your-customer procedures and transaction monitoring systems that could potentially identify users engaged in illegal activities. In response to these developments, dark web users increasingly turned to decentralized exchanges and peer-to-peer trading platforms that offered greater privacy and less regulatory oversight. These platforms allowed users to trade cryptocurrencies without providing identification or submitting to compliance procedures, maintaining the financial privacy that had originally made Bitcoin attractive to dark web users. The development of central bank digital currencies also created new challenges and opportunities for dark web operations. As governments moved toward implementing digital versions of their national currencies, Questions arose about how these systems would interact with existing privacy-focused cryptocurrencies and whether they would provide new tools for financial surveillance. Law enforcement agencies were also adapting their approaches to take advantage of new technologies and data sources. The pandemic had accelerated the adoption of digital communication and commerce platforms, creating vast new streams of data that could potentially be used for investigative purposes. Agencies began developing techniques for analyzing social media activity, online shopping patterns, and digital communication metadata to identify suspects and build cases. The emergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies provided law enforcement with powerful new tools for analyzing the enormous volumes of data generated by dark web activities. These systems could identify patterns and connections that would be impossible for human investigators to detect, potentially allowing agencies to map entire criminal networks and predict future criminal activities. But criminals were also adopting artificial intelligence technologies to improve their operations and evade detection. Automated systems could manage large-scale fraud operations, optimize pricing strategies for illegal goods, and even generate realistic-looking identity documents and other fraudulent materials. The technological arms race between criminals and law enforcement was entering a new phase characterized by increasingly sophisticated automation and artificial intelligence applications. The period also witnessed growing concerns about the use of dark web technologies by nation-state actors and terrorist organizations. While the dark web had originally been created by the US government to protect legitimate users, it was increasingly being used by foreign intelligence agencies, terrorist groups, and other hostile actors to conduct operations against Western interests. These developments created complex policy challenges for governments that wanted to combat criminal uses of dark web technologies, while preserving their legitimate applications for protecting dissidents, journalists, and other vulnerable users. The tension between security and privacy became increasingly acute as law enforcement agencies developed more powerful surveillance capabilities, while privacy advocates argued for stronger protections for anonymous communication. As 2021 progressed, Empire Market, which had become the largest and most successful dark web marketplace since Alphabet began, experiencing the same pressures that had led to the downfall of its predecessors. The site suffered from frequent downtime, apparent attacks on its infrastructure, and growing paranoia among its administrators about law enforcement infiltration. The eventual collapse of Empire Market in August 2021 followed a familiar pattern of instability, user exodus, and ultimate shutdown. But unlike previous marketplace closures, Empire's fall occurred in an environment where multiple competing platforms were ready to absorb displaced users, demonstrating how the marketplace ecosystem had become more resilient and diversified. The post-Empire landscape featured a more fragmented but also more resilient marketplace ecosystem, with multiple platforms competing for users and vendors while implementing increasingly sophisticated security measures to protect against law enforcement infiltration and rival attacks. As we reach the present day in 2025, the dark web has evolved into something that would be almost unrecognizable to the Navy researchers who first conceived of onion routing 3 decades ago. What began as a simple tool for protecting government communications has become a vast, complex ecosystem that encompasses everything from legitimate privacy tools used by journalists and activists to sophisticated criminal enterprises that generate billions of dollars in annual revenue while challenging fundamental pie. Assumptions about law enforcement, privacy, and social control in the digital age. The current marketplace landscape reflects the lessons learned from decades of evolution, experimentation, and conflict. Rather than relying on centralized platforms that could be shut down by law enforcement action, the ecosystem has fragmented into dozens of smaller, more specialized marketplaces that serve different geographic regions, customer bases, and product categories. This diversification has made the overall system more resilient to law enforcement pressure, while also making it more complex and difficult for casual users to navigate. Hydra Market, which dominated Russian-speaking markets until its shutdown by German authorities in April 2022, had represented the pinnacle of marketplace sophistication before its fall. The platform had generated over $5 billion in revenue and served over 17 million customers, making it larger than many legitimate e-commerce companies. Its shutdown marked the end of the era of mega marketplaces, but also demonstrated how quickly new platforms could emerge to fill the void left by major takedowns. The post-Hydra landscape features a constellation of smaller, more agile marketplaces that have learned to operate under constant threat of law enforcement action. Sites like Archetype, Abacus, and various incarnations of markets with names like Incognito and Tortuodor compete for users while implementing increasingly sophisticated security measures designed to protect against both law enforcement, infiltration, and attacks from rival criminal organizations. These modern marketplaces bear little resemblance to the crude forums and email-based systems that characterize the early dark web. Today's platforms feature professional web design, sophisticated customer service systems, advanced dispute resolution mechanisms, and security measures that often surpass those used by legitimate businesses. Many implement multi-signature cryptocurrency transactions, mandatory encryption for all communications, and elaborate vendor verification procedures that would be familiar to anyone who has worked in corporate security. The technological arms race between criminals and law enforcement has reached unprecedented levels of sophistication. Law enforcement agencies now employ teams of data scientists, cryptanalysts, and behavioral analysts who use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify patterns in dark web activities. These systems can analyze vast amounts of data to identify connections between different users, predict likely real-world identities, and even anticipate future criminal activities based on historical patterns. But criminals have also embraced advanced technologies to protect their operations. Modern dark web operations employ sophisticated operational security procedures borrowed from intelligence agencies, use artificial intelligence to optimize their businesses and evade detection, and leverage cutting-edge cryptographic techniques to protect their communications and transactions. Some criminal organizations now employ dedicated cybersecurity teams whose sole responsibility is protecting against law enforcement infiltration. The cryptocurrency landscape that underpins the dark web economy has undergone dramatic transformation in recent years. While Bitcoin remains widely used, its transparency has made it increasingly risky for serious criminal operations. Privacy-focused cryptocurrencies like Monero have gained significant adoption, while new technologies like atomic swaps and decentralized exchanges have made it easier to convert between different cryptocurrencies without leaving traceable records. The emergence of central bank digital currencies represents a potential paradigm shift that could fundamentally alter the dark web's economic model. As governments develop digital versions of their national currencies with built-in surveillance capabilities, the relative privacy offered by existing cryptocurrencies may become even more valuable to both criminals and legitimate privacy advocates. Law enforcement agencies are also grappling with the challenges posed by emerging technologies. Quantum computing, while still in its early stages, could potentially break many of the cryptographic systems that currently protect dark web communications. But the same technology could also enable new forms of encryption that would be virtually impossible to break using conventional methods. The development of decentralized marketplaces represents perhaps the most significant challenge to traditional law enforcement approaches. These systems distribute marketplace functions across multiple servers and use blockchain technology to eliminate single points of failure. While still experimental, successful implementation of truly decentralized marketplaces could make it nearly impossible for law enforcement to shut down dark web commerce through traditional seizure operations. The social and political implications of the dark web's evolution extend far beyond criminal justice. The same technologies that protect drug dealers and fraudsters also provide essential privacy protections for journalists, activists, and dissidents operating in authoritarian regimes. Efforts to combat criminal uses of these technologies must be balanced against their legitimate applications, for protecting human rights and democratic participation. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated both the dark web's adaptability and its potential for social harm. While the platforms quickly evolved to serve users whose traditional drug sources had been disrupted by lockdowns, they also became vectors for pandemic-related fraud and exploitation. The experience highlighted how dark web technologies amplify both positive and negative social trends, making their regulation and control a complex challenge for policymakers. Looking toward the future, several trends seem likely to shape the dark web's continued evolution. Artificial intelligence will probably play an increasingly important role in both criminal operations and law enforcement responses, with both sides using machine learning to optimize their strategies and stay ahead of their opponents. The ongoing development of privacy-enhancing technologies will likely make anonymous communication and commerce even more accessible to ordinary users, while surveillance technologies will become more sophisticated and pervasive. The geopolitical implications of dark web technologies are also becoming more apparent. As governments develop more sophisticated surveillance capabilities and impose greater controls on internet communications, the dark web serves as a potential refuge for activities that authoritarian regimes want to suppress. This dynamic creates complex challenges for democratic governments that want to combat criminal activities while preserving the privacy rights and democratic freedoms that their societies value. The question of whether artificial intelligence and advanced surveillance technologies will ultimately eliminate online anonymity remains hotly debated among technologists, policymakers, and privacy advocates. While law enforcement agencies are developing increasingly powerful tools for identifying anonymous users, privacy advocates are also creating new technologies designed to stay ahead of surveillance capabilities. The outcome of this technological arms race will likely determine whether anonymous communication remains viable in the digital age. The dark web's impact on society extends beyond its direct criminal applications. The technologies developed for anonymous communication have influenced the design of mainstream privacy tools, while the operational security techniques developed by dark web users have been adopted by journalists, activists, and others who need to protect sensitive communications. The ecosystem has become a laboratory for privacy and security innovation that benefits users far beyond its original criminal constituency. The economic impact of the dark web economy is also becoming more apparent as it reaches maturity. The billions of dollars in annual transaction volume represent not just criminal profits, but also economic activity that exists entirely outside traditional financial systems and regulatory frameworks. This parallel economy creates challenges for tax collection, financial regulation, and economic policy that governments are still learning to address. As we look toward the future, the dark web stands as both a testament to human ingenuity and a warning about the unintended consequences of technological innovation. The same tools that were created to protect legitimate users have enabled criminal enterprises of unprecedented scale and sophistication, while also providing essential protections for vulnerable populations around the world. The story of the dark web is ultimately a story about the double-edged nature of technological progress and the eternal tension between individual privacy and collective security. As new technologies continue to emerge and evolve, the lessons learned from 3 decades of dark web development will become increasingly relevant to broader questions about how societies balance freedom and security in an interconnected digital world, where the boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate activities are often blurred and constantly shifting.